police officers with protecting their right to free speech. Of course, we know that that right does not extend to breaking windows and starting fires. And we also challenge them with continuing that mission of ensuring basic life, health, and safety functions for our communities. We know that this incident has activated an amount of frustration, of anger, of rage and disappointment in our community of people who do not feel included in our regional and national prosperity. We know that the name George Floyd does not stand by itself, but it stands with names like Philando Castile. It stands with a long line of names that have unfolded over the past decade and even before that we have seen African American men who have lost their lives, unarmed African American men, non-violent, non-aggressive African American men who have lost their lives in ways that have been painfully disappointing. And we're committed to seeing, we're hopeful about seeing his name not added to the list of incidents that have gone without someone being held accountable for those actions. But we know that those are a part of that deep frustration and that deep anguish that so many members of our community face. We also know that when people take action, and when that rage and when that anger manifests itself in negative and destructive means, in ways that destroy the community institutions that our seniors look to in a pandemic, that our seniors look to for their medicine in a pandemic, that our families look to for their food during a food shortage, that our residents look to for their jobs and income and to just be able to earn a living during an economic crisis, then that too often serves to re-victimize, to re-traumatize those same communities over and over and over again. In St. Paul, in our Midway, along University Avenue, we see small businesses. We see generational businesses. We see businesses owned by new Americans and people of color. We see those communities, and we owe it to all of ourselves to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to protect our public and to ensure that we do not continue to sustain the type of damages that we sustained last night. 170 businesses, over 170 businesses were damaged last night. Our firefighters responded to 40-some fires. We cannot accept that as normal. We cannot accept that as okay in our community any more than we can accept the death of George Floyd as okay in our community. I am proud of our first responders. I'm thankful for the support that we've received from our partners from other jurisdictions and our partners from the state. And I am appreciative that we have so many teammates and partners in this work together. I have signed an emergency order declaring a state of local emergency around this situation in St. Paul right now, and also establishing a citywide curfew that will start at 8:00 p.m. tonight and that will continue until 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. This order exempts members of the media, and it exempts workers returning home from a work shift. Other than that, we are asking our community to stay home so that we can ensure that we can protect that basic life, health, and safety mission of our community. We've hosted digital roundtables today, engaging members of our community, members of our communities of color, business owners and business leaders in our community, and we're actually, as we speak, convening a roundtable of faith leaders in our community. All told, we've engaged over 400 different members of our community in this conversation digitally, and we're going to continue to do that. I have also worked with members of our faith community and challenged us to together announce and convene a citywide interfaith unity hour of prayer in the first hour of our citywide curfew. So from 8 p.m. to 9 o'clock p.m., I will be observing in my faith, and we're inviting everybody else who wants to observe in their faith with us in reflection on what happened last night, in prayer for the family of George Floyd, his friends, and all who are mourning him, in prayer for leadership in our community, from every pastor to our chiefs, to all of our mayors, to our governor, to our president, in prayer for our police officers, our firefighters, our healthcare workers, our first responders, in prayer for everyone who is feeling that just enormous sense of anguish that the things that we've experienced in our community this week can never happen again. With that, I'm going to pass it to our chief, Police Chief Todd Axtell, who will share with you additional details about our operational preparedness for tonight, as well as Chief Inks, who will share that with you, same thing with you from the perspective of our fire department. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today. As the Mayor had mentioned, obviously I've stated it before, and it deserves to be stated again. Our hearts and prayers go out to the family, the community, Mr. Floyd, everyone who's been impacted by this tragedy over the last week. It's been a chaotic time for our region, and specifically for the city of Minneapolis and the St. Paul Police Department and the city of St. Paul. I've got to tell you, I couldn't be more proud of the women and men of the St. Paul Police Department, our partners in the fire department, and all of our regional partners who helped us yesterday for a long, exhausting day of protecting the peace, making sure people didn't get injured, and helping our fire department make sure that they had the protection they need to extinguish many, many fires throughout the city. Obviously, where there's a lot of damage throughout the city, there were a lot of windows being broken, there was looting throughout the city, and our officers used a great deal of restraint, and they also used a great deal of determination to stop many of those active lootings throughout the city and active damaged property throughout the city. You know, the interesting part of the occurrence that we're in today is the fact that this has never happened before in the St. Paul Police Department in the city of St. Paul. All of our law enforcement partners are in the same boat. This morning, I talked to many of our local sheriffs and chiefs on a conference call about the challenges that we're all having. The difference in this circumstance is in past circumstances when one jurisdiction has a major issue that impacts public safety and civil disobedience actions throughout a city. We always have had our community, our partnering agencies to help with those circumstances, because we know not one agency is big enough to handle large-scale protests and large-scale civil disobedience. There has been looting and crimes all the way from Dakota County to Washington County, Anoka County, Hennepin County, throughout the entire region. And every one of the women and men of law enforcement throughout the region are working so tirelessly to make sure that we keep our community safe. Now you may ask, what are you doing in the St. Paul Police Department to make sure that people are safe and secure and we're protecting property? Well, let me tell you, we have mobilized our department. We are working closely with our partners, requesting mutual aid from the state, which we did yesterday. Mayor Carter made that request. The governor yesterday, after we had provided a specific set of assistance items that we needed to protect infrastructure locations, police facilities, the state capitol with our state patrol partners. That's what happened yesterday, and we got that. We received that assistance, which allowed our officers to go help our fire department partners and also try to hold those who were disgustingly looting throughout the city hold them to account and bring them to justice. And it wasn't all. I want to make myself clear. It wasn't all. There were a lot of people out there yesterday who simply wanted to grieve and show their frustrations. And they were allowed to do that. And the people that decided to take this as an opportunity to victimize our community, that's the part that's so frustrating for the public servants in the city of St. Paul. So tonight we have a plan. We have, again, mobilized our resources through mutual aid, through the state, EOC, the National Guard will be here in larger strength this evening. Our state patrol and regional partners will also be shoulder to shoulder with us. And we're going to do everything we can to meet our priorities. And our priorities are the protection of human life and human injury. And I have to say, being that has been our number one priority from the beginning, and we have not had injuries. And really that's a large task, and that's in a large part in really a great deal to do with the great work of the officers on the St. Paul Police Department and our partners throughout the region. So with that, I want you in St. Paul to know that you are in good hands. Our officers are in good spirits. They have their chins up. They are honored to be here. They're not going anywhere. They're going to be here today. They're going to be here tomorrow. You're in good hands, and we will come to a better time at the end of the road. Thank you. Next up is Fire Chief Butch Inks. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Axel, Mayor Carter. My name is Butch Inks. I'm the fire chief here in St. Paul, the city I grew up in and the city I absolutely love. In the last 24 hours, our fire department responded to over 295 calls. 169 of those calls were EMS calls. The other 126 were fire calls. Of those 126 fire calls, over 50 of them were actual working structure fires. We were successful at many of those fires with the utilization of our partners in the region. Many of our mutual aid partners we utilized yesterday, but we also utilized our own staff. Staff of nearly 200 of our own firefighters were deployed going to work yesterday. I want to take a quick moment to say a thank you to the women and men of our department and the work that they did yesterday, the responses that they made, responses under some pretty hostile conditions. While bricks and rocks and bottles were being thrown at them, they were pulling hose, making entry, and saved a lot of structures. I also want to make sure, I think, our city partners, city leadership, especially the police department. I'll tell you this, that without the police department responding with us, protecting us, leading us, more buildings would have burned down. They allowed us to show up on scene and do our job. So, Chief Axel, thank you. Thank you to your police.
You can't force me to do anything.
What are we doing now? Right now, we still have crews out there extinguishing fires. We have our Department of Safety and Inspection have their disaster assessment teams deployed, assessing about 100 structures right now on if they're safe, habitable. We have members operating out of the Emergency Operations Center. We have members operating out of the Dispatch Center so we can ensure a proper dispatch moving forward. And we have, as Chief Axel said, his department, his force is ready to serve. And know this, the fire department is as well. We have another 180, 200 firefighters on duty right now, ready to serve, ready to...
I'm not a hoe, bro. Nothing, man. I know what's right and what's...
To ensure that they're safe and cared for, every single one of them. So, with that, that's all I have, and thank you.
Mr. Mayor, you mentioned the businesses that were impacted yesterday. Today we heard the National Guard say that they got specific orders to help protect the target. But beyond that, they had more resources and they weren't given specific orders, which is why the governor ended up stepping in after midnight. Can you respond to that?
Yes, thank you. And I think I left the businesses off of my list when I shared who we'd be praying for tonight. To be clear, we'll also be praying for the businesses who are impacted by the events of last night. We had, in my estimation, a strong partnership with our National Guard. As Chief Axtell mentioned, that was really dependent upon the ability to give them a specific mission, which was to help us secure the Capitol, help us secure some of those kind of spaces so that our St. Paul police officers could be on the front lines with us. Our St. Paul police officers have spent an enormous amount of time investing in the type of trust, making deposits in the bank of trust that Chief Axtell always talks about. I literally hear Chief Axtell every day ask our officers 3 questions. Were your actions reasonable? Were they necessary, and were they done with respect? That's the standard that we always set, that we always hold ourselves accountable to. That's the standard that our community has come to know from the St. Paul Police Department. And we know that the relationships between our police officers on the ground floor and our community is really critical. As we think about what happened last night, one of the things that helped us get through that night is those relationships on the ground and the way that our officers were able to engage with residents and people who they knew and able to sort of separate the folks who they knew and are from this community and are part of our activist community and those who are not, who were here to incite. And so, from our perspective, we had a very strong relationship with the National Guard. Having additional National Guard capacity in our city today will help to boost our capacity, and we're looking forward to continue to work with them to meet the missions that we're up against.
The National Guard in Minneapolis, we were told yesterday, and I think from what they said today, that they had anticipated following those fire units and helping them. It doesn't sound like that's what happened here. Police were diverted to help with fire. Is that right? And can you tell me, was there communication about that? It sounds like where some of that confusion might have come from.
There was a significant amount of communication. As Chief Inks mentioned, our police department provided incredible coverage for our firefighters who were helping to put out fires at times with rocks and bottles being thrown at them. Our police department and our fire department worked very well together last night. They worked very well with a number of partners, which included assistance from our state troopers, from other agencies around the metro area as well as some assistance from our National Guard as well. I can ask our chiefs to speak more specifically to that if you like. Again, from our perspective, we had a very clear mission. We had a very clear set of assignments for the National Guard. They accomplished those for us, and we're able to move forward into today, into our preparedness for today. Can I add anything to that?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we asked for every resource we could possibly get from the National Guard yesterday. And when you receive human resources from outside the city, it's best to ask to have them protect locations, because it's not as difficult to understand a dynamic situation where officers and firefighters are coming under attack with bottles and rocks and bricks. If they can secure a specific location, it's much more manageable and much more wise to do it that way. So we used every resource we possibly could get from our National Guard partners yesterday.
So were they asked to help protect those other businesses, or what happened there? Because it sounded like today they said they had more resources, but they weren't asked to go anywhere besides the target.
I can just speak to yesterday. We asked for resources. We received the resources. We put them to good use so our officers could go out and make sure we protect our community and protect the lives of our community members.
What's the plan for the National Guard then tonight?
Right now, I'm waiting to get the specific numbers that we will be receiving. And as soon as I get those numbers, we have specific asks, we have specific missions that we have requested through the state of Minnesota, Commissioner Harrington's office, and the governor's office, to make sure that we have a clear plan, as we always do, to make sure when we ask for resources, the resources that we're getting understands that there's a mission and there's a plan to put those resources into place. And that occurred yesterday, and that is, again, occurring today.
Can you share with us the number you're asking for, and how that's different, or if it's similar to what you asked for yesterday?
So today I've requested over 400 people from the National Guard and the State Patrol to help us in St. Paul. How will we enforce the curfew? Yeah, so like any other time, any other crime that is on the books in the city of St. Paul, we obviously enforce the law. We do that very carefully and thoughtfully within our community standards, but that the curfew order is in place to make sure we keep St. Paul safe tonight. So we will be enforcing that curfew.
What's the penalty if someone violates it?
So sure, we can refer to that to Steve Linders or our city attorney's office to get the specifics on that.
Misdemeanor, $1,000 fine.
City attorney, you want to come? Lindsay. City Attorney Lindsay Olson.
Thank you. The penalty is a misdemeanor at the state level and $1,000 and or $1,000 fine.
Steve, quick question for you. We were talking to some of the business owners today who felt like they just kind of had to stand there and watch the buildings burn and get looted without any help. What do you want them to know when they felt like they couldn't get help when they needed it?
It's a very fair question. Thank you. You know, I have so many friends throughout this city who own businesses that I've been talking with over the last 24 hours. And there is a level of frustration. And my heart goes out to our business community and the neighborhoods surrounding those business communities. Again, we used every possible resource that we had yesterday to address our number one priority, and that was to protect the lives of people in our communities along those business corridors. And our officers did an incredible job to accomplish that. But there were only a certain number of officers to go around to protect some of those businesses. And I want our community to understand clearly that tonight we will have many more resources to make sure that we are spread out in a larger capacity to provide additional protection to those businesses in our communities throughout St. Paul.
Could I ask a
Time for
question
one more.
about-
Just one more.
Okay, I just was curious, Chief, about arrests and investigating who committed crime. I saw on this list it looks like there were 5 adults arrested. And yesterday you had some strong words for people saying, we're going to look at the surveillance video. And how realistically, how many resources or how much can you dedicate to that? And how do you ensure that people would be held accountable for those business owners?
Thank you for your question. Yeah, we're having ongoing discussions about that. The great thing about the criminal justice system, and working again closely with our county attorney or city attorney's office, is that there's something called the statute of limitations. And if you break a window, you loot a building, you burglarize a building, and we have identification to show that you did that, and we will, and we do, and we're working on it, there will be some felony and misdemeanor charges coming out at the end of this. We are mobilizing within our department after we have stabilized the current situation, an investigative team to go through social media. We're going to go through other photos, open source photos, and identify people who were looting, committing criminal damage to property and other crimes throughout the city. And I guarantee you we will pursue those criminal charges with our criminal justice partners to hold those people account. So if you think out there that you are going to come to this city and commit a crime under a cloak of a mask, I'm telling you, this mask isn't going to protect your identity. We will find you at some point. There's a chance you could get away with it. But if you want to roll the dice, I would suggest you not do that.
Do you believe any of those people came from other communities, or do you believe these are individuals who are from St. Paul? Do you have any indication at this time of who was committing the looting and the vandalism?
I don't have any reason to believe that all of these people were from St. Paul. I believe firmly that many of these people are from outside of our city, outside of our community. Our community members, you know, we have our issues from time to time in St. Paul, but nothing like what occurred last night. There were some outside influences that is very concerning, and we're going to make sure that we we have a heavier force out there tonight to make sure that happens. So.
Fire chief, a question. Just, we know that the fires last night were substantial. We saw, early hours of the morning, the smoke going over Allianz Field, people smelling it from out. Can you talk just about the magnitude of the fires last night and the challenges that posed?
Yeah, thank you. So the magnitude, a lot of the structures had heavy fire load. There's furniture, there's auto parts stores. So that made it challenging. It ignited quicker and burned faster. Fire doubles in size every minute. So just the ability to get there and make a quick entry, was challenging. So. Every little bit that's delayed, given the fire load. It was windy last night, I think 13 to 14 mile an hour winds. All of that contributes to an increase in the magnitude of the fire. So.
I have one more question for the mayor. I'm sorry to finish it. Will you extend the curfew through the weekend, or is it just tonight? When will you make that decision?
We have put the curfew in place for tonight. I think we'll be making game time decisions as we move forward. We'll be making day-to-day decisions on how and when to extend it. That's correct. It's tonight, right? It's just tonight. The curfew is in place tonight. And tonight. I'm sorry. Okay. The order that I signed puts a curfew in place for tonight and tomorrow. It is, of course, extendable, but we will make that decision when the time comes.
And when you say tomorrow, so 6 a.m.
Tomorrow. I'm sorry. It's
Tonight to 6 a.m. Saturday to 6 a.m.
yes. So 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. twice.
Okay.
Yes.
So 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. again, Saturday night and Sunday morning.
Correct. That's right.
Thank you, everyone. Peter Leggett's available for follow-up questions in the mayor's office. Roy McCosa from Fire, and I'm available for the police.
Thank you all.
So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Binks, you said 50 structure fires?
Set of events. I want to.
Good morning, everyone. This has obviously been the most difficult week in Minnesota in recent history and maybe in our entire history. Our community, especially our Black community, is hurting beyond words. Minneapolis and St. Paul are on fire. The fires still smolder in our streets. The ashes are symbolic of decades and generations of pain, of anguish, unheard. Much like we failed to hear George Floyd as he pleaded for his life as the world watched, by people sworn to protect him, his community, our state. Philando Castillo, silenced, unheard. So many other friends, brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, senselessly died in our street. Their voices went unheard, and now generations of pain is manifesting itself in front of the world. And the world is watching. One of the first people I called after seeing the video was Valerie Castillo, Philando's mother. We've become friends since the killing of Philando. And for those watching today who aren't familiar, Philando died in front of his loved one and his child, and left them behind, and left behind a grieving mother who has become an advocate for justice, an advocate for reform, but more importantly, an advocate for kindness and decency. And when I talked to Valerie, she said first and foremost, seek justice, seek fairness, and reach out and show kindness. What the world saw last night was not that. What the world has witnessed since the killing of George Floyd on Monday has been a visceral pain, a community trying to understand who we are and where we go from here. I'm joined today by Attorney General Ellison, by Major General John Jensen, the Adjutant General of the Minnesota National Guard, Colonel Langer of the Minnesota State Patrol, and Commissioner John Harrington. I spoke this morning amongst leaders in our community, watching this happen across the United States, watching another name be added, and for those of us who are old enough, to Rodney King, to Mike Brown, and unfortunately now we've added George Floyd. The situation on the ground doesn't allow us at this time to tackle those issues. The very assets in our community, our libraries, our businesses, those nonprofits and government entities, our light rail system, are all shut down from this. We have to restore order to our society before we can start addressing the issues. Before we turn back to where we should be spending our energy, making sure that justice is served swiftly, and that we learn something from what George Floyd gave on Monday. Now I want to just be very clear, and I'm going to have the team talk about what transitioned last night when the state assumed responsibility over the security near the 3rd precinct, where the state secured critical assets, and where the plan going forward to ensure that tonight our buildings do not burn, our citizens are secure, and that space that we're going to create allows us to get back to the conversation of serving justice and making sure that we're not adding to that list of unheard names. And I want to be very clear and speak to that community. The very tools that we need to use to get control, to make sure that buildings aren't burned and the rule of law collapses, are those very institutional tools that have led to that grief and pain. I understand clearly there is no trust in many of our communities. And the differentiation between the Minneapolis Police Department that we witnessed losing trust of those they're there to serve is very difficult for people to make, for those standing up here with me. I understand that. And I will not patronize you as a white man without living those lived experiences of how very difficult that is. But I'm asking you to help us. Help us use humane way to get the streets to a place where we can restore the justice, so that those that are expressing rage and anger and demanding justice are heard, not those who throw firebombs into businesses that our communities of colors have worked so hard to build back up, areas that were blighted at one time and are thriving because of their entrepreneurship and their hard work. A library in an area where our children, as we know, are institutionally put behind, and the achievement gap for our communities of color is a shame on this state that we continue to admire by talking about and don't repair it. And that tool to help with that burned last night. So I want to just call out very, very clearly, as we put a presence on the street to restore order, it is to open that space to seek justice and heal what happened. I will not in any way not acknowledge that there's going to be that pain, but my first and foremost responsibility to the state of Minnesota is the safety and security of all citizens. We cannot have the looting and the recklessness that went on. We cannot have it because we can't function as a society, and I refuse to have it take away the attention of the stain that we need to be working on, is what happened with those fundamental institutional racism that allows a man to be held down in broad daylight, and thank God a young person had a camera to video it, because there's not a person here or listening today that wonders how many times that camera's not there. These are tough questions. These are things that have been brewing in this country for 400 years. We have people out there putting themselves on the line to try and put out fires in our firefighters that are under attack. Those are the things I'm asking you. Help me restore that order. We will do that under state leadership and state guidance. You will hear directly from them of once that decision was made around 12:15 last night and that first mission was executed around 3:45 at the 3rd precinct, we will see a difference. So I'm asking you, and you'll hear from them, to talk about this. I also want to think about what happens when we don't have that. People who are concerned about that police presence of an overly armed camp in their neighborhoods that is not seen in communities where children of people who look like me run to the police, others have to run from. So I understand that that's out there. But last night I got a call from a friend and a dedicated public servant. Senator Torres Ray called in her district, and it was on fire. And there weren't any police there. There weren't any firefighters. There was no social control, and her constituents were locked in their house wondering what they were going to do. That is an abject failure that cannot happen. We must restore that order to that. Senator Torres Ray has fought her whole life on these issues of inequities and making sure that people's voices are lifted up. But what she understands is none of us can lift those voices. None of us can tackle these problems if anarchy reigns on the street. I also want to address an issue, and this one is on me, and I will own it. Earlier this morning, when this mission was carried out under my direction to resecure the 3rd precinct, to do so in a manner which I am proud of how it was executed by this team, no injuries and no loss of life, a reestablishment to put the fires out for those businesses. A CNN reporter a crew was arrested by the State Patrol. A few minutes after hearing that, I was on a call with CNN President Jeff Zucker, who demanded to know what happened. I take full responsibility. There is absolutely no reason something like this should happen. Calls were made immediately. This is a very public apology to that team. It should not happen. And I want to be clear for those of you listening. I think our Minnesota's reporters know this. I am a teacher by trade, and I have spent my time as governor highlighting the need to be as transparent as possible and have the press here. I failed you last night in that. And it does not escape me that we are here on the catalyst that lit this spark by what happened with a police detainment of George Floyd, and the idea that a reporter would have been taken while another police action was in play is inexcusable. So to CNN, to the CNN team, to the journalists here, this is about having a plan, and that's what these folks are going to talk about. This is about having an aggressive approach to understanding what the community needs, to not coming in heavy-handed with them, but to create space where the story can be told. In a situation like this, even if you're clearing an area, we have got to ensure that there is a safe spot for journalism to tell the story. The issue here is trust. The community that's down there that's terrorized by this, if they see a reporter being arrested, their assumption is because something's going to happen that they don't want to be seen. And so that is unacceptable. We will continue to strive to make sure that that accessibility is maintained, that not only that, the protection and security and safety of the journalists covering this is a top priority, not because it's a nice thing to do, because it is a key component of how we fix this. Sunshine, disinfectant, and seeing what's happening has to be done. So again, I appreciate President Zucker's call. I appreciate his understanding in a situation that he was rightfully incredibly angry, and that falls squarely on me. That apology has been issued, and I think going forward to make sure it doesn't happen again. It's time for us to clean our streets. It's time for us to execute today in a way that shows respect and dignity to communities. I'm going to ask for a lot of help today of those folks who want to see it. It is my expectation that justice for the officers involved in this will be swift, that it will come in a timely manner, that it will be fair. That is what we've asked for. I have been in contact with Hennepin County Attorney, and I am confident that those very things I just said will happen. We will continue at the BCA to do a fair, a full, and a swift gathering of all of the evidence involved. But I would reiterate again, for so many of us, not all that's done in every other case where all of that evidence is gathered before, and I would ask that the swift justice be carried out. So Minnesotans, your pain is real. The chapter that's been written this week is one of our darkest chapters, and we can choose a few things. We can choose to try and get past this. We can choose to put a force out there and stop things from happening. We can hope that in the midst of COVID-19 or something else, it passes by and we don't have to turn that mirror to look at the harsh reality of those underlying gaps, whether it be healthcare disparities, whether it be educational disparities in our communities of color, whether it be policing disparities in our community of color, whether it be wealth acquisition in our communities of color, are all very real. We pride ourselves on a state of openness. We pride ourselves on a state of being friendly. I've talked a lot about One Minnesota. That wasn't on display last night. I don't naively think everything heals and you come to the forefront and you say it'll be better. This is a community that demands and should expect more than words. They should expect results. Lieutenant Governor Flanagan and I have tried to make equity the center of everything we've done. But obviously in Minneapolis on Monday night, there wasn't a lot of equity for George Floyd. His family is probably wondering where the One Minnesota is for them. And that's on us as Minnesotans, us as the governor and the team that works with me, to put the things in order to establish order in our streets, to establish and rebuild trust in our communities, to lift those voices up, to be heard, not pleading for their lives, but demanding the changes necessary so no one else is put into that position. So I would like at this time to turn it over to Minnesota's Attorney General, Keith Ellison.
Governor, thank you. Martin Luther King said many years ago that riot is the way that the unheard get heard. He didn't condone it, but he said to the nation, as a person who always protested peacefully, that don't just dismiss that and ignore it and relegate it to just criminality and bad behavior. Actually ask yourself, what's going on there? And is it something that we as a society absolutely must pay attention to? I think we must pay attention to it. I'd like everyone to recognize the fact that the National Guard just a week ago was administering COVID-19 tests to help people. The presence you see on the street, don't react to them the way you might react to the Minneapolis Police Department. It's not the same group. They have different leadership, different authority, and their job is to try to bring peace and calm back again. Please remember that this is not the group that you associate with unfair conduct, but it's a group that, in fact, just a week ago was trying to make sure that Minnesotans could survive and thrive and live, because we are still in the middle of a pandemic. It is that sense of service where they get involved when it comes to natural disasters, storms, floods, rains, diseases. Now they have to restore order on the streets. And I hope that the community who is protesting will protest peacefully, but not see this as another occupation by another military force. It really is make sure that there's calm and peace and that everybody can operate peacefully. So please accept it as that. I'm asking that of our community. It is essential, and I've said this before, everybody keeps asking the question, when? And this is a perfectly legitimate question. it is important to know that under Minnesota statutes, the primary jurisdiction for criminal prosecution is with the county attorney in which the offense occurred. And I believe that the message has been sent and received that the wheels of justice must turn swiftly. Not unjustly, expeditiously, thoroughly, fairly, but swiftly. It is important that people have confidence that accountability, no matter who you may be, is how we live in Minnesota. Let me also say that this prosecution, this investigation, this criminal process is important, and it is, and the whole country and the whole world's looking at it, cannot solve the problem. As the governor so eloquently said, events like this start and they come to a conclusion, but we never start the process of real reform. I will submit to you that myself and Commissioner Harrington, under the leadership of the governor, have already started a process on the working group on preventing and reducing deadly force encounters with the police. We have a report that we want attention from the legislature and the entire community on, to focus on that so that we can really get to the bottom of this when it comes to issues of use of force, when it comes to officer wellness, when it comes to community healing, and a whole range of training issues, all kinds of things that bear on this issue. And it's not just those things. I believe that the real work of our working group is the implementation of this, and that really begins in earnest now, and is more important now, I think, than ever. So I just want to, as I conclude my remarks, I want to say that we have to have a situation where Lake Street, a precious jewel of our state, is a place where Minnesotans can walk again, where businesses can be safe again. But I want to be clear that if the message was, this situation with Mr. Floyd is intolerable, absolutely unacceptable, and must change, that message has been sent and received as well. And the governor, myself, the lieutenant governor, all of us are committed to that long-term change. And I can tell you that I spoke with many legislators who feel the exact same way. People in the philanthropic community feel the exact same way. So I think we're going to do some real changing. We're not just going to fix the windows and sweep up the glass. We're going to fix the broken, shattered society that leaves so many people behind based on their historical legacy of being in bondage and servitude, then second-class citizenship, and now fraught with disparities from everything from incarceration to housing to wages to everything else. And so with that, I want to hand it over to General Jensen, Major General Jensen, who will further elaborate. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Major General John Jensen. I'm the Adjutant General of the Minnesota Army National Guard, and I've been the Adjutant General since November of 2017. And what I'm going to describe this morning very quickly is the actions of the Minnesota National Guard since we were mobilized under the Governor Walz's executive order. Like many Minnesotans, I woke up yesterday morning to the news that the Minneapolis mayor had requested National Guard support. The only difference was I opened up my phone and there was a text from Commissioner Harrington. It wasn't the newspaper or the morning news that notified me of that. So immediately yesterday morning, I made contact with the commissioner, and we began planning on the potential employment of the Minnesota National Guard in support of Minneapolis. For those of you that may not understand how emergency management works in Minnesota, I'm just going to take a quick moment and explain that. In Minnesota, county emergency management coordinators, or the mayors of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Rochester, and Duluth, may request National Guard support through the state EOC. So in accordance with that, Minneapolis Mayor Mayor Frey, made that request to the Minnesota National Guard. What traditionally comes with the request, though, is a layout of capability needed and exactly the problem that's trying to be solved. Typically, the request for the Guard and that type of information come at the same time. Sometimes it lags. So when it lags, what we do is we begin preparing for an unknown mission. But in this case, we sort of knew what we might be doing as it related to civil disturbance in Minneapolis. But it's very important that we know exactly what we're being asked to do, so we make sure that we have the right equipment. We mobilize the right number of soldiers and the right number of soldiers and airmen to support those soldiers that are going to conduct the mission. That element was lacking. But with the governor's decision to allow me to continue to plan, we began notifying soldiers early yesterday morning of a pending mission. Once we notified our soldiers, again with the governor's verbal approval, we began mustering our soldiers and moving them into the metro area, knowing that the most likely probability of employment was going to be Minneapolis. As we met as a senior team yesterday afternoon, the one topic that continued to be discussed was the lack of clarity and the lack of a mission and a description of what exactly the Minnesota National Guard needed to do. My concern to the governor was twofold. One, I didn't know what special equipment I might need to accomplish the mission. And two, I was very concerned about being asked to move to an unfamiliar area of Minneapolis under the cover of darkness. I wanted to get out when it was still daylight, where my soldiers and my airmen could become familiar with their terrain and familiar with their mission. We never got such mission assignment. We never got such mission description. Yesterday, we performed 4 missions in support of the governor's executive order. The first mission came from the governor directly. That came when we were notified of an immediate and pending threat to the state capitol. My immediate advice to the governor was to assign that mission to the Minnesota National Guard. And he agreed, with one caveat, and that is the State Patrol also wanted to support that mission. So in cooperation with the State Patrol, we began that mission. The second and third mission came together. It came from St. Paul. Specifically, it was to provide security of the Ramsey County Law Enforcement Center and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. The key part of that security was to ensure that St. Paul police officers were not required to secure those facilities, and they were therefore relieved of that duty and able to respond throughout the city of St. Paul throughout the day. And then the last mission we did receive yesterday evening was an escort mission for the Minneapolis Fire Department. The concept of the operations that we would link up with the Minneapolis Police Department, and as they went into unsecure and dangerous areas, that we would secure the area so they could perform their life-saving and property-saving missions. And we continued to do those missions through the evening. As the governor indicated, about midnight this morning, the governor authorized a law and order mission into the 3rd Precinct, what we would call in the military a clear and security mission. So under the leadership of the State Patrol and the Department of Public Safety, the Minnesota National Guard was assigned a task and a mission in support of the State Patrol. We would follow the State Patrol and we would help secure the area that they cleared. Our soldiers remain in that area as I speak now, still on that mission, still securing that location. So people and MnDOT can come in and begin the cleanup of that area. Now, I picked up one other mission with the city of Minneapolis. I won't cover the exact details, but it's ongoing right now with the Minneapolis Police Department. And I'm very proud of the relationship between the Minnesota National Guard and the Minneapolis Police Department that goes back to Super Bowl 52 just 2 years ago. Chief Rondo and I worked together during that Super Bowl. So we have had opportunities to serve together, and I have a lot of respect for him. We will continue to operate in Minneapolis until such time that the governor relieves us of that mission. And we will do so in support of the Department of Public Safety and the Minnesota State Patrol. So that's just a little bit of background of what the Minnesota National Guard did since yesterday morning when we first notified of a possible deployment, through the deployment and through our mission set last night and then early this morning. My recommendation this morning to the governor was that I continue to do the state capitol mission and that I continue to do the mission in support of the Minneapolis Fire Department. I believe both of those are very critical mission, both to the state and to Minneapolis. And then we'll conduct follow-on missions, again, in support of the Minnesota State Patrol and the Department of Public Safety. So at this time, I'd like to introduce the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety, Commissioner John Harrington.
Good morning. My name is John Harrington. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety. Governor Walz tasked me to prepare options and capacities and capabilities to respond to the civil unrest, protests, but more importantly and really more directly to the unlawful behavior of the arsonists, the thieves, the burglars, the vandals who were tearing apart the city of Minneapolis. I want that to be clear that that's, I think, a clear line of demarcation that we were operating under, because it is fundamental to the Department of Public Safety, it is fundamental to the State Patrol that we take an oath to support the Constitution and that we believe that our work is absolutely essential to allow everyone's First Amendment right to have their voices heard. We were not deployed, and we have not been deployed, and we will not be deployed to stifle free speech. But we will not and cannot allow unlawful, dangerous behavior to continue. I am particularly proud of our relationship with both the Minnesota National Guard, Commissioner Stroman from the Department of Natural Resources, and Colonel Langer, who works for the Department of Public Safety as the colonel for the Minnesota State Patrol. We called and they came. And literally it was that, it doesn't make it much more complicated than that. I said, I'm going to need you, and I'm going to need you here in the city, and I may need you for 2 or 3 days, and I may need you longer than that, and I can't tell you what I'm going to need you to do yet, but I know I need you. And they came. They began preparing readiness to be able to move folks from all over the state of Minnesota, literally from miles and miles away, to come to the metro area to be prepared to help us keep the peace. Over the course of the day, I met with my counterparts in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Chief Arredondo and Chief Axtell, to talk about what missions they needed the state to help them fulfill. The Department of Public Safety at that point was calling to say, we are here to support you. We are your partners. Tell us what you need and we will backfill, we will fill in the gaps. Tell us what you need for resources and we will help you get it. And we did get some very specific missions, and in other cases, we got no real mission at all. And in the absence of a real mission, we began to identify where the critical needs were. We tasked the State Patrol, we tasked DNR, we tasked the Minnesota National Guard to meet specific missions that we were requested to do. But we also tasked them with being flexible, because we knew that if things continued to devolve, that we might need to pivot and we might need to shift from a static post of guarding critical infrastructure to a fast-moving operational approach of restoring order. About midnight last night, I was party to a call where that pivot had to be made, where the mayor of Minneapolis called and said they had no more resources and they were not able to meet the public safety needs and control the behaviors that were occurring on Lake Street. They had lost the 3rd precinct. There was concerns about a gas main, and there was concerns about continued looting and fires burning throughout the city of Minneapolis. And different than our first night, I had comparable concerns of looting and fires being set in the city of St. Paul, and so we had to divide our resources to meet the needs of both of the Twin Cities. The task the governor gave me was pretty simple, actually. It was to pull together a team that could go in, keep the peace, protect people, protect them, protect their safety, protect their lives, protect their liberty, and to protect property that was being burned up literally every minute that we delayed. The Hennepin County Sheriff was one of my first calls, and Sheriff Hutchinson immediately moved into action to give us support. We already had DNR, we already had State Patrol, we already had Minnesota National Guard. We had it available, but we hadn't tasked them with what we needed to do yet, and we had to create a plan. The U of M Police Chief, Matt Clark, offered support. Eddie Frizzell, the Chief of Police for Metro Transit, offered support. And with that team together, we put together a 250 ballpark cadre team to go in and restore order on Lake Street. We created a mission. It was very specific. I am a mission-driven person. We talked about the fact that we were going to be respectful of people's rights, that we were going to keep the peace and make people safe, and that we were going to follow our training and protocols by making a public announcement that they needed to clear the streets, and that if they didn't clear the streets, arrests were imminent. We made those announcements. We made those announcements repeatedly so that no one would be confused about what our intent was or what we were there to do. And then, having made our announcements, we began to move to clear those streets. I will tell you that the vast majority of the great people of Minnesota and the great people of Minneapolis who are still having their guts ripped out about the Lloyd murder, and we'll call it a murder, that's what it looked like to me. I don't want to prejudice this from a criminal perspective, but I'm just calling it what I see at that point. They weren't the people that were out there on the streets at 3 o'clock in the morning when we arrived on Lake Street. The people that were out there on Lake Street at 3 o'clock in the morning weren't the good people in Minnesota. They weren't the good people in Minneapolis. They weren't the people that wanted to mourn the lossing of a friend and a relative and a neighbor. And when they saw the National Guard, Minnesota State Patrol, and this cadre, this team moving down the street, the vast majority of them did what we thought they would do. They left. There were a few that decided not to leave. That was a choice that they get to make, but we had advised them what that choice would result in. And we took action to respectfully and carefully take folks into custody as was necessary. And it was a very limited and very structured and extremely disciplined approach to making those arrests. I'm very proud of the fact that despite what you've seen over the last few days of gas and canisters and foggers, almost no chemical agent was necessary to be used last night. We did it the old-fashioned way. Command presence, a uniform presence, and a clear intent to keep the peace, restore order, and to keep people safe. My task today is a little different. Having accomplished that mission, and I think we've secured those streets, and I appreciate the fact that I've right now got National Guard folks still holding that ground that we took last night. We need to keep that ground, and we need to prepare for what may come today. Our task today is we're bringing together a unified command of metro area police departments, sheriff's departments, and other law enforcement jurisdictions and other public safety entities into a multi-agency command center where we will create a plan that will keep the peace, maintain the peace, and prevent further lawless behavior in the city of Minneapolis, in the city of St. Paul, and in the surrounding suburbs. We're going to do this the right way. We're going to do it with full knowledge that our oath is to serve the state of Minnesota, to serve the communities, and to protect them. We are fully confident that we can do that mission and that we can do it while still ensuring that the constitutional rights of those who need to have their voices heard and who need to freely assemble can be protected. I can tell you that no one could have heard Mr. Lloyd's voice in the chaos of the screaming and the shouting and the fires at 1 o'clock in the morning on Lake Street. My job is to make sure that tonight that the community is safe and that our team is ready and prepared to keep it safe. With that, I am very pleased to introduce the Colonel of the Minnesota State Patrol, Colonel Matt Langer.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. My name is Matt Langer, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as Chief of the Minnesota State Patrol. I don't need to rehash what the Commissioner went through in terms of the detail that he provided on the role of the Minnesota State Patrol as it pertains to the city of Minneapolis this week. I was thinking about what to say about this week, and difficult is the first word that comes to mind, and it doesn't seem to represent everything that has occurred this week well enough, but it certainly represents the challenges that the Minnesota State Patrol has faced the last couple of nights as we have worked hard to combat the lawlessness, the dangerous behavior, and the criminal activity that has occurred both in the city of Minneapolis and other places. I'll speak specifically to last night because, as you've heard, shortly after midnight, between midnight and 1 a.m., Governor Walz asked the State Patrol to lead an event in the city of Minneapolis to quell the unrest that was occurring in and around the 3rd Precinct. There were many challenges in that area. One of the main challenges in that area was that there were fires set, and the Minneapolis Fire Department was unable to get there and extinguish those fires because they were shelled by those that were demonstrating and choosing to make life difficult for everyone who was trying to improve the condition. So as the Commissioner explained, we assembled a team, both with the State Patrol, the DNR, the University of Minnesota, Transit PD, Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, and the National Guard, and we assembled that team quickly, swiftly, strategically, and we descended into the city of Minneapolis with the one goal in mind: to, as safely and quickly as possible, recover the ground that had been lost to lawless activity and make it safe again, and then restore order, clean the area, and get it presentable so that we can move into the future tonight and beyond with a much different picture of what it means to be a resident citizen and your ability to demonstrate peacefully. That's the mission that we took on. That's what we did overnight. It was difficult, dangerous work for everyone involved, the people that are demonstrating, those that are caught in the middle of a demonstration without the desire to demonstrate, and the first responders that are there trying to do good work. We had a few troopers that suffered minor injuries. I'm thankful they're only minor. They stayed on the line and continued their good work because we needed every single one of them to do this job. We remain ready. We're there today with the National Guard. We're doing our best to hold that ground well and to make sure that we restore order, clean that spot up to the better than it was before, and to continue our efforts to make sure that public safety is of paramount concern as we move forward both tonight and into the future, and then work together to restore order across the entire city of Minneapolis. Just as a side note, we had a couple missions other places last night. Of course, our responsibility at the state capitol, and we also assisted the city of St. Paul with some lawless behavior that was occurring on University Avenue with some of our mobile response team assets. One thing I'll note is that we have troopers in the metropolitan area from all across the state of Minnesota. That was an opportunity that we afforded the governor to make a staffing boost that is within the purview of the executive branch and within the ability of State Patrol to do on very short notice. My hat's off to those troopers that responded, those DNR officers that responded from all across the state of Minnesota to come for an unknown period of time and to work very, very hard to make Minnesota what we believe it should be, a safe place for everybody. Thank you.
I would note before we take questions, and we will try and make sure we answer every one or as many as you need to ask, I would note to the reporters here in Minnesota, it was about 3 weeks ago I stood in front of you and as we passed 500 deaths by COVID-19 and said that on about the 29th of May we would pass 1,000. That will happen today. So in the midst of this pandemic, we are still working that. We believe, again, numbers are down. ICU bed capacity is stable, and we are doing everything we can. And as you heard from the folks speaking, the vast majority of people out there who were expressing their First Amendment rights and the rage over what happened to George Floyd were wearing masks and were trying their best to social distance and not touch things. I would, before I go to questions, note that the desire to get back to normal is so overwhelming for everyone. When so many in Minnesota would said, what else could happen? We've witnessed this, but I think it's an important time to pause about that is, the problem is for so many of us thinking that normal is where we want to go. Normal was not working for many communities. Normal was not working for George Floyd pre-COVID-19. It's certainly not working now. And so I think as you heard the Attorney General talk about that work that we're trying to look at to use this as a point and not just rhetorically, but a point to make those changes. With that, Mary, we'll start.
The press, I failed you last night. What about the public? The public did not see you, hear you. You did not address the public the last 2 nights.
Well, I certainly don't think it's important to be on TV. I think what you expected me to do is to be there is we were in a support role as state law shows. And once it became apparent to me that the city of Minneapolis would not be able to complete that, I was directing the state to take that over. This is my responsibility. Well, I think obviously if you think I didn't, that's probably the case as a reporter. But I think in the moment of making sure as those decisions were being made and that we were staying in the lane that we were asked to support this, and as it deteriorated, it was at 12:05. There was a decision last night that we made is to come in front of you at that time because that was the transition point, because what you're seeing now is the state is the lead element now, starting at 12:05 last night and those first missions that were carried out. So I think for many of you who know, I try and make myself as available as possible. I think it was important for me to be getting the data and the feedback. I was watching where you were seeing, and to be quite candid, when the third precinct was abandoned, it seemed at that point in time that was a time to move. So,
Where were you? Were you in the residence? Did you evacuate? Where were you?
No, I stayed in the residence. Is where I work from. I have all the electronic tools, and we were on all night. And as I said, we were taking calls and adjusting, and I was able to track as the situation evolved on going down. There was a dangerous task that I tasked the State Patrol and the National Guard to go down and take that. Those of you who were watching that as I was, as the lawlessness was burning down the third precinct or whatever, that can't be allowed to happen. It took a little while to plan this to get going, but that's where I was at to make sure it was executed.
Governor Walz, there were millions of Americans and Minnesotans certainly watching on their TV screens as this unfolded last night. There was almost a complete lack of visibility of local police, state police, National Guard. After much fanfare about how the National Guard was coming in, people watched buildings burn, public and private. How could there not have been a clear mission for the National Guard when they were called in and you knew things were going to happen last night?
Yeah, I will let my leadership come back up there. You're absolutely right, and I think that speaks to itself that by shortly after 10 o'clock, it became apparent that structure would go. The way this works is the mayors ask and they take charge and lead on the missions. I'll let the folks come up here said, I see that too. I think the decision to not engage, and I want to just be clear, there's philosophically an argument to be made that an armed presence on the ground in the midst of where we just had a police killing is seen as a catalyst. My point to that is we don't need a catalyst, it's already burning. And so this is trying to strike that balance. And so I am in total agreement with that. You will not see that tonight. There will be no lack of leadership, and there will be no lack of response on the table.
As a follow-up, should there have been a National Guard presence on every corner in those areas last night as a deterrent, as opposed to having them come in
well, I would ask, and
under
I'll
darkness?
answer this one, potentially, but the decision on that, as it's made from the city, and on this one, I think I would agree with them. We saw the first night, decisions were made. Up until about 8:30 last evening, it appeared that things were relatively peaceful on that. There was a decision during the day whether did you occupy the entire city and shut it down after those 24 hours. In retrospect, I'm assuming that, yes, we would say that. But at the time, and again, we will not know it as proving the negative, would it have simply started those that movement faster, and would we have seen it moved out of the 3rd precinct? But yes, certainly, it's a valid critique and point. Yes.
Governor, you know, there was uncontrolled looting in St. Paul yesterday afternoon, and you're talking about making decisions at 10 o'clock. Why are you making the decisions then and not coming up with these scenarios as these things are happening just up the street from where...
The leadership of communities is led by local leadership, their police force. They were at that time, had sources in reserve, they were not being requested. They were not being requested, and I'm on with them. The reason we're standing here today is, if this would have been executed correctly, the state would not lead on this. The state would have supported those, and they would have moved forward. That did not happen. So now today, we're taking that. We're making the decision to go and moving forward. And again, I would go back to Tom's question. Had I known that we were not going to see that or the capability to do it, should the state have come in? Potentially, but I want to be very clear. This, with the exception of the state troopers who have a very specific statutory requirement on the highways,